Well, welcome back. So we're into the final furlong now. I believe that's the racing expression anyway. And we're into the last two sessions of the day, but these are going to be some of the most intense ones, I think. We've worked our way up the stack from first thing this morning. We were deep in the ocean in the submarine cables. We've crawled up the pipes into the data centers. We've looked at silicon. We've been through video caching. We've looked at the global CDN market and where the global CDNs are operating and so on. Now we're going to start looking at how you run and operate a CDN right up there. Once you've got the whole thing built, how do you keep it running? How do you scale it? And how do you operate at scale? Now, Mark, are you out there? Let's just check you've got your mic working and so on.
Yes.
Yes. You'll have to get a bit closer to the mic, I think. There we are. You are there. It's so sunny for you, and I'm in deepest, darkest England, about 50 miles from you across the stupid channel. It's just this country. It's gloomy. Why is it still daylight for you? That's what I don't understand. It's not fair. Right, take us into the panel, Mark.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm going to have a discussion with three gentlemen about orchestrating, operating CDNs and all the issues, well, the challenges, let's put it that way, around it. So I would like to give an introduction to the three people joining me. Jim, can I start with you?
Yep, hi.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So hi, this is Jim Brickmeier. I am Chief Product and Marketing Officer at Velocix. We're a licensed CDN provider and a provider of video advertising technology to large service providers around the globe.
Perfect. Good. Johan from Edgeware.
Yes. Thank you. So hello, everyone. Johan Bolin is my name. I'm the Chief Product Officer and Chief Technology Officer of Edgeware. We are also a provider of products and solutions for private managed CDNs, but also we have solutions for packaging, channel origination, and subtitling.
And not the CDN, I heard. Adrian.
Yeah, hi, I'm Adrian Bloem. I work for NBC in Dubai in the Middle East Broadcasting Center, and I mostly work on the digital infrastructure of Shahid, which is our video app competing with Netflix and YouTube out here in the Middle East. And I'm head of digital infrastructure, so very much into delivering video at scale in a very difficult region.
Exactly. Very good to have you here, Adrian. Good. Let me first also put the first question to you, Adrian. You've built your own CDN. You're using, do this in partnership with MediaNova. You're relying on them for expertise, software, even, I think, part of the infrastructure even. Can you explain us why you've chosen MediaNova instead of a hard and software solution, or you build it on your own, and especially in terms of orchestration and managing, etc.
Well, mostly because, I mean, the idea itself sounds fun and makes a lot of sense if you have a region where there's spotty coverage by the different CDNs. So we started with tying together all these different CDNs to get some presence in Riyadh, in KSA, and then get some presence in Cairo, in Egypt. But none of the CDNs would have every different city. So one of the main reasons for us to start looking at doing this ourselves was finding those gaps, and where we really wanted to have presence doesn't necessarily make sense for global CDN to invest in now, where it would make sense for us. The first thing you then think, of course, is, well, how hard can this be? It's just you just run Varnish or Nginx and you put it on a box with fast enough hardware. But very quickly, going through the initial few POCs, you sort of go, yes, we could probably figure out how to do this. Is this really core business of what we're trying to do with a relatively small engineering team? Just because Netflix does it as well doesn't necessarily mean we have anywhere near their resources. So our entire tech team is by now about 100 people, which is great, but it's not enough to have a dedicated team for your own Open Connect-like service. So we started looking at different ways to sort of accelerate this whole thing. looking at which part is the most difficult. Is it the software, is it the hardware, or is it the actual routing? And I think it was pretty clear that one of the main issues was going to be just the being comfortable with things like BGP, with AS numbers, with everything that goes with that, and also how dangerous it can be if you get it wrong. Unlike your garden shed router, Wi-Fi router, if you get these things wrong, you break parts of the internet, and that gets a bit scary. So we talked to different partners. We actually talked to Velocix as well, but we settled on MediaNova largely because they're very, very comfortable in this region. They've done a bunch of projects here already, so they already knew most of the people in the telcos that we needed to talk to as well. So there was a lot of overlap there. Plus, they were very open to us then taking the parts that we find interesting and start getting hands-on with. I could go on for another hour, but I don't think we don't have that much time.
There's a management orchestration, just to go a little deeper in this. Is that still done by you? Is that done by MediaNova? Is it a shared effort, or how? Because typically that kind of stuff gets complicated.
In terms of routing video between the different CDNs and so on. Yeah, so that's we've been using different tools over the years. They keep getting bought by companies who keep sort of sunsetting these tools because they don't really know what to do with them. So we used, for instance, XDN, which got acquired by Fortinet, who then turned it into FortiDirector, and they had no idea what this was, and also had no idea why it wasn't some kind of hardware appliance. And that's typical of these solutions. So we're currently using Sodexis. That's more and more embedded in our backend APIs, and it's getting to the stage where we are starting to consider, okay, so it's great to have an interface for this, but shouldn't we take on the entire logic and start optimizing it for our own specific use case? But yeah, that part is still very much with my team in Jordan, who do the actual routing and spread of the traffic.
Okay, good. Johan, talking about complexity, I mean, you know, because you're a vendor, you've been through all the complexity stuff. We also now see that CDNs are not acting in just managed environments, but even on internet environments, even hybrid. We get very peaky traffic sometimes. So how does, let's say, virtualization and these kind of tools help with coping with these kind of challenges in peak traffic and balancing between offline traffic, online traffic, etc.?
Well, I think one of the biggest differences or changes that virtualization have brought is, especially in combination with public cloud platforms, is that CDNs used to be the infrastructure you built, and you had your POPs, where you had your POPs, and you had your peering as agreed and kind of negotiated with the ISP providers. And that is kind of changing a bit, because while public cloud platforms might not be the most economical fashion to deliver, to use to deliver CDNs from, but they still offers a flexibility to spin up POPs in a dynamic fashion. So nowadays, if you know where you have what kind of peering capacities different public cloud platforms have, you could kind of build your CDN dynamically. That's a big difference from how it used to be. That said, those virtualization platforms introduces also big challenges, because when you build your own permanent CDN with your own managed infrastructure, a CDN consists of two sides, right? So what you have on one side, you have the sessions where you are delivering the streams to the end users, but on the other hand, you have the content propagation flow. So we need to feed your caches with the content, and that is to some extent much more difficult in a virtualized environment, because you don't have the same control and you don't have the same capacity on the ingest side, and it simply takes time. So So the virtualization have introduced a lot of flexibility, not only in managing your own managed resources, but actually to create new POPs if you need to do that. But it also introduces a number of new complexities that we haven't had in the past.
Good. Jim, we have a similar issue on the resources. I mean, Johan already mentioned a little bit, like the number of resources we're using for delivery is getting more and more fragmented. Whether it's hardware, just pure CUTS hardware that you use for high volume delivery versus clouds versus virtual versus edge that is coming, just as adds more and more complexity. How do you cope with that from a Velocix standpoint? What do you see in terms of challenge?
Yeah, so I think Johan was correct in that, you know, as you start to add this virtualization into the mix, it, you know, on one hand, it provides you with a bunch of additional flexibility as to how you deploy these CDNs, but it also adds layers, potential layers of complexity. And so the challenge from a CDN supplier standpoint is how do you harness the flexibility, but try to keep the some of the complexity down, right? And so some of those things you can do in the way that you implement the software and how you present the orchestration frameworks to people so that we automate as much as possible in the systems, and you use extract as much data as you can and put you know, put that information in front of people so they can actually see what's going on in those systems. And beyond that, you know, we also look at how we provide some supplementary services and education and stuff like that to operators so that they can get their systems up to speed quickly. They can learn on the fly as they start to get these systems deployed, and you know, learn how to manage these complex systems. So yeah, I mean, definitely the orchestration frameworks are very powerful in that you can, if you build the system right, the system can be responsive to demand and responsive to workload, and understanding all of the different types of environments that you can actually deploy a CDN across. The challenge is in figuring out when to expand beyond the on-net platform into some of these other frameworks, and to put some business policies around it as well that say, you know, under certain circumstances, based on real-time conditions, how do you burst capacity into some of these other locations? Are there cost considerations associated with it? Are there other sorts of constraints that you may have? There may be contractual constraints around how you do that for certain types of content. So it's really a combination of a lot of different types of intelligence that you can build into CDN frameworks to try to automate as much of that as you can. And I think that's really where the importance comes in for you know, building a product for service providers, is starting to look at this like, hey, this thing has to be very, very reliable to support massive scale and massive flexibility, but it can't be overbearing. Otherwise, you can't troubleshoot it. You can't actually run it.
Can be very costly. We can't have either. So
yeah.
Good. Adrian, you're focused on the Middle East. I think most people know that this is not the most easy region to work with from an infrastructure standpoint, data centers, connectivity, even on political point, it's not easy. Managing a CDN from a technical point of view is one thing, but managing all the other factors as part of it, how much is that influencing basically your work in a region such as the Middle East?
Well, it keeps it interesting to the point where whenever I talk to people in the US and Europe, I actually go, guys, delivering video is a solved problem for you. Like if I look at Europe and the US, like, what are you talking about? This is not an issue. Come have a look at what we're dealing with. And yeah, I really had to go back in my knowledge from the 90s when I moved here 10 years ago. and sort of rethink like, oh, these are all the things that I took for granted that are just going to be there as infrastructure. And I had never really considered if you spend a lot of time around the Amsterdam Exchange, for instance, you forget that this is not a usual thing to have anywhere in the world. In the Middle East, there's a couple of attempts at building exchanges. I think the UAE exchange here in Dubai is probably one of the more successful ones right now. That's DICX who are building that one. I know that the Lynx guys are doing JEDX in Saudi, and we need those initiatives because when I first came here, for instance, there's 2 telcos in Dubai, and they were interconnecting in Frankfurt. So putting your servers here locally, for instance, made no sense because you'd always be on the wrong end of these connections. Yeah, and so that kind of the network topology in the region has nothing to do with what makes geographic sense or economic sense even. And figuring out how everybody is interconnected, where your content is actually coming from and going to, means that you're constantly making these really counterintuitive choices on the topology of things. So, for instance, for us to run live streams for the Middle East, even though our broadcasting is in Dubai and our satellite uplinks are here, it actually makes more sense to do a satellite downlink in Europe because that's where the actual streams are generated. So you're constantly looking at, okay, what's the most optimal place of getting the content into the networks in order to get it into our main areas where we want to have great streams going. But yeah, if I then look outside of the region, so outside of the Gulf and North Africa and so on, it's a global service. But if I look at the US and our live streams channels there, is something that I don't worry about at all. This is just one of the many things, and that just runs, comparatively speaking. We don't have to worry about it. We don't have to micromanage it. We don't have to constantly open tickets with ISPs to troubleshoot why they're actually getting content from a CDN node in Singapore instead of the one that they have on net, etc., etc. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey into a lot of things that I never thought I would have to go this deep into. Just looking at this from a perspective of, but we're just building a video app, right? So how hard can it be? Well, pretty hard, it turns out. Yes.
Jim, I had a question on you in terms of clouds versus CDNs. I think Will mentioned it from Akamai a little bit, competing with the clouds in a certain way. I mean, we see clouds moving into the CDN space. We now see CDNs moving into the cloud space with edge compute. It's getting a very blurry line between the two in the end. So how can CDN still be differentiating in the future in comparison to, for instance, what cloud is doing?
Yeah, so I guess from our perspective, you know, we view cloud as an environment in which CDN technologies can run. And so we see, yeah, we definitely see cloud operators, you know, a lot of service providers have decided that they're going to partner with some of the cloud providers and build cloud environments deep at the edge of their networks. And, you know, that's great because, you know, fundamentally it's the same environment, whether you're running then on net deep at the edge of the network or running in a public cloud environment. You can run your CDN across all of those environments in the same fashion. And you really, the intelligence is how do you decide where you're going to run certain functions within the CDN. You may want to, you know, run them deep at the edge of the network because, you know, that's where you get the best efficiency, or you may want to run it up in the public cloud to get better efficiency, or on net, which of course is typically the most cost-effective way of handling things. And so, you know, from our standpoint, like, you know, we see a little bit of bleed over, but, you know, the difference is that CDNs, especially in the context of video, there's a lot of sophistication to the CDN and how you route traffic how you process that traffic, how you protect content. And so we see a lot more intelligence. You know, CDN is not just a caching or storage and distribution mechanism anymore. It's a lot more sophisticated than that. So when you go look at cloud architectures, you know, it's really more of an environment than it is a solution. And so we see, well, you know, our expertise as a company, you know, we really see being more about how do you enable these kinds of applications and fulfill these content contracts and make sure that the application is a true, you know, highly resilient, high quality of experience kind of application. And then beyond that, as we're starting to see some of the application models move towards more ad-based models as well, we start to see video advertising and personalization infused into content delivery. And that's where you start to see some, you know, some daylight between what you would consider to just be like a generalized cloud and a CDN solution, which is built for purpose, really built for specific types of applications.
Yeah. About the specification, Johan, Edge, 5G, buzzwords, everybody's talking about it. Nobody really has a real clue where it's going. From an Edgeware perspective, where do you see, I mean, typically it's used for low latency, deep edge, deep delivery, processing on the edge. Those are typical use cases. Which ones do you think from those aspects do you think is the most relevant one to really tackle CDNs, to really get deeper into mobile networks or edge networks?
And I might make some guys disappointed now, but I think to me, or to Edgeware, 5G is pretty boring. It's just like another fiber, essentially. There's a lot of buzz about edge compute as a part of 5G. And really, edge compute is not necessarily something that 5G enables. Already in 4G, you could do edge compute, according to the standard. But something that is quite often forgotten is that the 5G and 4G edge compute is today primarily for private LANs and private radio access network. It's not necessary for public networks, meaning that what that means technically wise is that the user plane is not exposed at the radio base station, meaning that it might look topology wise as a good place to put the cache at, but actually you don't get access to application layer at the edge. You could run IoT kind of applications and so on at the edge, because those are typically not in the public domain. But public domain applications are simply not accessible on the edge. I know that 3GPP are working on specs that will eventually enable operators to place user plane applications at the very edge. That could change things, but I think that's so the entire buzz about edge compute and 5G, I think it will take a few years before we could potentially build CDNs that far out at the edge, if you will. To be honest, I'm not convinced it will ever happen.
Okay, interesting. Very interesting. Adrian, if you look at the capabilities of your video workflow in general, especially in the terms of infrastructure that you have in the Middle East, typically as you have a workflow, then you publish, you use the CDN to deliver in all kinds of different ways. Did you do anything special in terms of workflow that, let's say, a normal European content player would not do, or doesn't have to do, like whatever, distributed origins or processing on the edge, just to make sure that things are workable, for instance?
Yes, but loads of things, but probably not the things that you would immediately come to mind. So one of the weird things in this region is that internet connectivity is very good. I mean, in my home here in Dubai, I have fiber coming in, and the network quality is quite good. but the pricing for it is very, very high because this is one of the indirect taxes that the governments levy. It also means that as a company, the cost of a connection is insanely high, and as a media company, that is a problem because basically what I need to run an OTT service with content coming from our studios here in Dubai is 10 gigabit. What we have in practice allocated right now is more like 120 megabit, which is less than I had at my desk when I was working at a university in the Netherlands in the 90s. So to me, it's been going back in time in that sense. And it means that we have to do things like, if you're using 50 megabit per second broadcast files as your mezzanine files, and you need to stream those to end users, then you're not going to just dump those into some cloud service to transcode them. Because first you have to get them there. And well, yeah, a 50 megabit file on a 100 megabit line just takes a long time to actually get there. So we do a lot of the initial transcode in-house on premise using actual hardware, which is very, very weird because the rest of our service is very much cloud native, and we have no idea where the actual servers are. A lot of it is serverless and so on. But then suddenly you have this hardware on premise because of this weird quirk. And of course, there is a growing cloud presence in this region. AWS is in Bahrain now. We have Azure in the UAE. That's slowly being built out. But like I said before, because of the way that most of the networking still runs through Marseille and Frankfurt, there is not a lot of point for us to have a presence in, for instance, Bahrain, because on a map, this is close to most of our audience. In terms of the speed of light across actual cables and submarine cables, it's just very suboptimal. We're better off being in Frankfurt in that respect. So we do a bunch of stuff on premise that we wouldn't want to do on premise just to save on bandwidth costs. And then we use cloud providers in Europe because they are better connected than the presence they have in the region. And again, that's the weird routes that we take, and is one of the reasons that whenever I get a chance to talk to the telcos in the region, I point out that if I was speaking at a conference in Oman, so I pointed out to the people from the telcos there that I took a flight from Dubai to Oman, and I didn't go through Frankfurt to get there. But oddly enough, the internet traffic actually does. And fortunately, that's all changing, but there's still a very, very long way to go. And yes, that means that we're now, of course, with building out our own CDN, we're reconsidering where that origin should be and how we could potentially do the actual transcode in a place where it's the cheapest and the most efficient to do that. Then stop doing the just-in-time packaging of it. Actually pre-packaging again and transferring and scheduling that and bringing those back locally and do pre-fill of caches and so on. So it's a constant playing around with all those limitations of where the choke points are in this whole infrastructure.
Nobody said building CDNs is easy, right?
If it were easy, everybody would be doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. We'll go to some questions. I'll pick two. I have a couple of them, but I'll pick two. I have a question that I think this is apparently meant for Jim. Jim and Johan. For live event operators who have intermittent use, what is the best virtual CDN option?
I'll jump in here. In terms of a virtual CDN, I mean, I think that for live events, there are lots of options out there in terms of if you have your own network versus, you know, if you don't. If you have your own network, there's software out there that you can use that's fully virtualized and allows you to spin up capacity as needed to support live events and spin it back down when you don't need it. I think that's the key advantage of some of the virtualized technologies and some of the orchestration capabilities of things like Kubernetes and so on, is that you can be responsive to demand and try to be as cost effective as possible. I think that is one of the challenges that when you don't have your own network is, if you're running gobs of live traffic, the question becomes, how do you do it cost effectively, especially if you're using unicast, not a multicast delivery mechanism, and that's still something that requires discussion to understand the specific application and how many people you're hitting and in what regions and all of those kinds of things. But I think there are quite a few options out there, and a lot of times these days we see people asking about hybrid kinds of scenarios where they have some fixed capacity on their own networks and they want to be able to burst capacity into the cloud to support spikes. In the case that, as an example, you've got World Cup soccer games, if you got the Olympics coming, and they don't want to build out full capacity for those spikes, they just build out capacity for their standard kind of traffic load, and then look to expand capacity beyond that by using either the same CDN solution hosted in a public cloud environment, or by doing some CDN selection and looking at multiple CDNs to go ahead and carry traffic above and beyond the private network.
Yeah, the virtual CDN might be still the CDN service that you can just use.
Yeah.
In the end.
Okay.
I'll leave it like this because we're already over time for a minute, and I know otherwise Dom will get to me. So I'll leave it like that. Thank you, gentlemen, being here. Very interesting, and yeah, thank you all. Thank you.